A crisp October wind swept through Hawthorne Park, scattering amber leaves over its winding paths and manicured lawns. Once a sanctuary for families, joggers, and weekend picnickers, the park had long been a symbol of community pride in the heart of Eastbridge, a mid-sized city known for its quiet dignity and understated wealth. Yet that autumn day, as the sun dipped behind ancient oak trees and cast long, distorted shadows across the grass, the park's placid surface began to reveal a secret darker than anyone could have imagined. It was just after dusk when joggers and dog walkers first noticed something amiss near the secluded rose garden. In a narrow, rarely frequented pathway, a body lay crumpled beneath a statue of a weeping angel. The victim was identified as Sam Barrett, a local art curator, renowned for his discerning eye and his tireless efforts to preserve the city's cultural heritage. His face, usually composed with gentle determination, was now frozen in an expression of horror and disbelief. A single blood-stained scarf, a garment he always wore on brisk evenings, was draped around his neck, and clutched in his hand was a torn scrap of paper, on which, in hurried scrawl, were the words, "Not all art is beauty." Within minutes, the serene park was transformed into a crime scene. Uniformed officers cordoned off the area, their flashlights cutting through the early night like blades. Detective Elena Marquez, known for her unyielding resolve and perceptive mind, arrived at the scene. She knelt beside Sam's body, noting the precision of the fatal wound, a single deliberate stab to the chest, and the absence of any signs of a struggle. Everything, it appeared, had been arranged with a grim kind of care. The note in his hand, the way his personal scarf was twisted around his neck, and even the position of his body suggested that the murderer had left behind a message, one meant to be deciphered by someone willing to look beyond the surface. Elena began by interviewing the few witnesses present. A middle-aged woman named Lillian, who had been walking her dog along the park's eastern trail, recalled hearing a soft murmur just before she spotted Sam's form. "It sounded like someone was arguing in whispers," she said, her voice trembling. Another witness, a teenage skateboarder, mentioned seeing a figure in a dark coat hurrying away from the rose garden. Their descriptions were vague, yet something in them suggested that the person was not simply a passerby, but rather someone who knew the park's hidden corners well. In the days that followed, Detective Marquez dug deeper into Sam Barrett's life. Sam was not a man of secrets in the conventional sense. His work as an art curator was public, his events and lectures well attended by the community. Yet as Elena sifted through his personal files and digital records, she discovered a hidden side to his passion, a secret project he'd been pursuing for months, one that seemed to involve a series of rare, possibly forged artworks. Sam had grown increasingly obsessed with the provenance of a particular painting that had recently been donated to the Eastbridge Museum. Rumors had circulated among art collectors that the painting was not an authentic masterpiece, but rather a skillfully executed forgery. In his private notes, Sam had written of layers of deception hidden beneath a gilded facade, a phrase that resonated eerily with the image of his lifeless form beneath the weeping angel. As the investigation unfolded, Elena began to suspect that Sam's murder was linked to his discovery of a larger conspiracy, a tangled network of art theft, forgery, and illicit money laundering that had infiltrated Eastbridge's upper echelons. Her inquiries led her to the local art scene, where whispers of scandal were as common as compliments on a well-curated exhibition. At a small gallery in a converted warehouse downtown, Elena met with Marianne DuPont, a respected art dealer with decades of experience. Over cups of strong coffee in a setting as unpretentious as it was elegant, Marianne recounted that Sam had confided in her about troubling inconsistencies in the documentation of the disputed painting. He was convinced that something wasn't right, Marianne said, leaning forward as if to impart a secret. He mentioned names of collectors, of dealers, names that carried a heavy weight in our circles. He said that if the truth came out, it would shatter not only reputations but also fortunes. Marianne's account pointed Elena toward a shadowy figure known only by the initials, R.K. Rumor had it that R.K. was a collector with a notorious reputation, an enigmatic man who operated behind a veil of anonymity, trading in stolen and forged artworks with the precision of a seasoned criminal. Elena's investigation into RK proved challenging. He left few traces, and his transactions were conducted through layers of intermediaries and offshore accounts. Yet as Elena cross-referenced financial records with art auction data, she began to notice a pattern, a series of high-value sales and suspicious transfers that led back to a private bank in an overseas jurisdiction known for its lax financial oversight. Each piece of evidence, though circumstantial, seemed to confirm that RK was a key player in a vast network exploiting the art world for nefarious purposes. Parallel to these developments, Detective Marquez uncovered evidence that Sam Barrett had been in correspondence with an unknown informant who signed off only as Icarus. Their email exchanges were a cryptic dance of half-truths and veiled warnings. In one message, Icarus had written, "The higher you fly, the harder you fall, especially when the wings are forged." It was as if the sender was cautioning Sam against delving too deep into the underbelly of art forgery, a realm where beauty and deception intertwined with deadly consequences. The more Elena read, the more convinced she became that Sam's discovery of the painting's dubious origins was merely the tip of an iceberg that stretched far into the world of high finance and international crime. One chilly evening, as Detective Marquez pored over case files in her cramped office overlooking a busy downtown street, she received a call from a disheveled man claiming to be a former employee of a prominent auction house. The caller, whose voice was hoarse from years of suppressed secrets, revealed that the auction house had been used as a front for channeling forged artworks and laundering money. He mentioned that Sam Barrett had approached him weeks earlier, asking pointed questions about the origins of certain consignments and the identities of buyers. "They always speak in codes," the man explained, "about authenticity and legacy, but in reality, it's all a cover for something much bigger." Though the caller's identity remained anonymous, his detailed account provided a crucial link between the local art world and the shadowy network operating beneath the glittering surface of Eastbridge. With mounting evidence and leads pointing in multiple directions, Detective Marquez began to assemble a profile of the conspirators. At the center was RK, whose elusive transactions and high-stakes maneuvers suggested that he was orchestrating a scheme that spanned continents. Then there was the anonymous Icarus, whose warnings indicated that someone within the inner circle had become alarmed by Sam Barrett's probing inquiries. And finally, there were whispers of a powerful syndicate within Eastbridge's financial community, individuals who used their influence to secure lucrative art deals and to silence dissent with quiet ruthlessness. In a daring move, Detective Marquez arranged a covert meeting with a well-connected journalist named Derek Lawson, known for his fearless exposés on corporate corruption and art crime. In a discreet cafe tucked away in an unremarkable side street, Derek shared with Elena a trove of leaked documents obtained from a whistleblower inside the private bank linked to RK's transactions. The documents detailed a series of offshore transfers totaling millions of dollars, funneling money from dubious art deals into accounts controlled by shell companies. One document, in particular, bore a signature that matched the style of Icarus's emails, a signature that hinted at an ironic duality. The very wings that were meant to soar had become instruments of downfall. The revelations sent shockwaves through the investigation. Detective Marquez now faced a labyrinth of financial records, encrypted communications, and anonymous sources. The pieces of the puzzle, Sam Barrett's final investigation, the cryptic note found at the scene, the whispered testimonies of art dealers and former employees, and the damning financial documents, began to form a picture of systematic fraud and calculated silencing. Yet, as Elena delved deeper, she encountered obstacles at every turn. Key witnesses became evasive, and several promising leads went cold as those implicated in the conspiracy used their considerable resources to cover their tracks. Anonymous threats began arriving at her office, a single typed message on a plain sheet of paper stating, "Curiosity is a dangerous trait." Despite the danger, Elena pressed on, driven by the conviction that uncovering the truth was the only way to honor Sam Barrett's legacy. A breakthrough came when forensic experts managed to trace the origin of the blood found on the torn scrap of paper from the scene. The blood, when subjected to DNA analysis, matched that of an individual with a long criminal record in art theft, a man known as Raymond Ray Keller. Keller was a small-time thief who had over the years been involved in several high-profile heists of art pieces from local galleries. Though his name did not carry the weight of international infamy, his involvement in the network of forged artworks could not be dismissed. Under interrogation, Keller, nervous and twitchy, revealed that he had been hired by an intermediary to clean up after a deal gone wrong. "I was just a fixer," he insisted, his eyes darting around the interrogation room, a low-level operative. "They told me to make sure no one talked about it." Keller's confession, though vague, confirmed that Sam Barrett's murder was linked not only to the high-stakes world of art forgery, but also to a violent enforcement mechanism designed to protect lucrative secrets. As Detective Marquez began to connect the threads, a pattern emerged that implicated several unexpected figures. One such figure was Celeste Monroe, a charismatic curator at the Eastbridge Museum of Fine Arts. Celeste, widely admired for her innovative exhibitions and her impeccable taste, had quietly financed several controversial acquisitions over the past decade. In private conversations, sources revealed that Celeste had been under immense pressure from investors to secure exclusive rights to rare artworks, even if it meant bending the rules of provenance. When confronted by Elena, Celeste maintained an air of cultivated nonchalance, dismissing the allegations as the inevitable complications of high culture. But as the evidence mounted, a series of secret emails, unexplained financial transactions, and a recorded phone conversation in which Celeste mentioned keeping the secret sealed at any cost, her carefully constructed facade began to crumble. The turning point in the investigation came during a tense midnight raid on a derelict warehouse on the city's industrial outskirts. Acting on a tip from an insider who claimed to have witnessed clandestine meetings between art dealers and money launderers, Detective Marquez led a team of federal agents into the building. In a room dimly lit by a single flickering bulb, they uncovered a makeshift studio filled with forgeries, meticulously recreated signatures, and detailed ledgers. Among the piles of counterfeit documents was a leather-bound notebook bearing the unmistakable handwriting of Sam Barrett, a notebook he had hidden away, filled with his private research and annotated by his own hand. The pages were dog-eared and smudged with ink and sweat, a testament to the frantic pace at which he had worked. The notebook confirmed what Elena had long suspected: Sam had been close to exposing a multi-layered scheme that involved not only forged artworks, but also the systematic embezzlement of public funds by a cabal of influential figures. In the chaos of the raid, several key operatives were apprehended, including a mid-level bank clerk who had been responsible for executing the offshore transfers and a notorious art dealer with ties to organized crime. Their confessions, pieced together by diligent interrogation and corroborated by the leaked documents provided by Derek Lawson, painted a damning picture of collusion and betrayal. Yet, even as the arrests were made and the evidence presented in court, Detective Marquez could not shake the feeling that a larger, more insidious network was still at work, a network that thrived in the interstices of the art world and high finance, shielded by layers of legalese and coded communication. The trial that followed was one of the most sensational in Eastbridge's history. In a cavernous courtroom filled with anxious spectators and media cameras, prosecutors laid out the case with meticulous precision. Testimony after testimony, from former employees and expert forensic analysts alike, revealed the depth of the corruption that had poisoned the city's cultural institutions. Yet, as the proceedings neared their conclusion, a final twist upended the narrative. In a confidential statement provided by an anonymous source, delivered in a sealed envelope on the morning of the verdict, a single sentence was found: "The masterpiece was never meant to be seen." The message left the courtroom in stunned silence. It hinted at a deliberate concealment that went beyond the exposed forgeries and embezzlements, suggesting that an even greater secret lay hidden in the shadow of Eastbridge's glittering art scene. Unlike many true crime cases that conclude with a neat sense of closure, the outcome of the Eastbridge scandal defied simple resolution. While several conspirators were convicted and significant reforms were imposed on the financial practices of cultural institutions, the anonymous note and the unresolved identity of R.K., the elusive figure believed to be the mastermind behind the network, remained an unsettling reminder that some enigmas persist despite the full force of the law. The city of Eastbridge was left to grapple with the profound implications of the case, that in a world where beauty and deception coexist on the same canvas, every revelation only serves to deepen the mystery of what lies beneath. In the months after the trial, Detective Elena Marquez continued her work with a quiet determination, driven by the belief that the pursuit of truth is an endless journey. She often revisited the evidence in her office, a cluttered space filled with notebooks, photographs, and digital files, pondering the unanswered questions that still haunted her. The case of Sam Barrett and the intricate web of art, money, and betrayal had transformed her view of the world. No longer could she see the art world as a realm of transcendent beauty. Instead, she recognized it as a battleground where ideals clashed with greed and where every masterpiece concealed layers of human frailty. In a rare moment of introspection one winter evening, while watching the snow gently fall outside her office window, Marquez penned a single line in her personal journal: "Some canvases remain forever unfinished." The words resonated with a bitter truth, a truth that the legacy of the Eastbridge scandal, like an incomplete painting, would continue to provoke questions long after the final brushstroke had been laid. There was no grand epilogue to the case, no triumphant unmasking of every hidden adversary. Instead, the investigation left behind a mosaic of fragments, a torn scarf, a cryptic note, and a labyrinth of financial records that together hinted at a reality too complex to capture in a single verdict. The enduring mystery of RK and the anonymous warnings, the unresolved transactions, and the silent corridors of power in Eastbridge served as a perpetual reminder. Some truths, once revealed, scatter into the shadows, waiting for a new light to expose them once again. As the seasons changed and Eastbridge slowly attempted to rebuild the trust it had lost, the legacy of that autumn in Hawthorne Park lived on in whispered conversations and furtive glances exchanged in gallery corridors. Detective Marquez, though celebrated for her role in bringing many of the culprits to justice, remained wary of the seductive interplay between art and deception. For in the world she had uncovered, beauty was as much a mask for corruption as it was a beacon of hope, and every masterpiece carried with it the potential for both revelation and ruin. And so, with a steady heart and an ever-curious mind, Elena Marquez continued to walk the city's shadowed streets, aware that while justice might illuminate one corner of darkness, there would always be another gallery where the secrets of power were hidden behind the gilded edges of a painting, waiting for someone brave enough to lift the veil. On a chilly November evening in New York City, the streets of Manhattan were alive with the ceaseless rhythm of urban life. Neon signs flickered over crowded sidewalks, and the unmistakable hum of honking taxis blended with the distant sound of sirens. Amid this familiar chaos, few could have foreseen that one ordinary night would unravel a mystery so dark it would shake the city to its very core. It began in Grand Central Terminal, one of New York's most iconic landmarks. Commuters bustled through the historic concourse, their faces lit by the pale glow of early evening. At approximately 10:47 p.m., as the terminal's crowds began to thin, an unsettling discovery was made near the Whispering Gallery, a quiet alcove where echoes carried secrets. A maintenance worker, Robert Diaz, found the lifeless body of Stephen Carmichael, a 42-year-old investigative journalist known for his relentless pursuit of the truth. Carmichael's body was slumped against a marble pillar, his eyes wide in a final silent plea. A single handwritten note was clutched in his hand. Its message, scrawled in hurried, uneven letters, simply read, "They won't let it go." Detective Laura Bennett, a seasoned member of the New York Police Department's Homicide Bureau, arrived on the scene just minutes later. With her customary calm and piercing gaze, she began to assess the scene. There were no signs of a struggle, no shattered glass, no overturned benches, only the stark stillness of a life abruptly ended in one of the city's busiest hubs. The note in Carmichael's hand, paired with the strategic location of the body in such a public yet secluded area, suggested that this murder was anything but random. As the investigation unfolded, Detective Bennett quickly learned that Stephen Carmichael was far more than a routine crime victim. Over the course of his career, Carmichael had built a reputation for digging deep into stories of corruption and abuse of power. His recent work had focused on a series of irregularities within the city's public transportation contracts, a subject that had earned him both admirers and dangerous enemies. His final article, which was due for publication the next morning, had hinted at a scandal involving millions of dollars diverted from funds intended to maintain New York's aging subway system. The potential implications were explosive, and it soon became apparent that Carmichael had likely crossed paths with individuals determined to keep the scandal buried. Detective Bennett began her inquiry by interviewing witnesses at Grand Central Terminal. A transit employee recalled noticing a man in a dark suit loitering near the Whispering Gallery shortly before the discovery. He kept checking his watch, almost as if he was waiting for someone, the employee said, his voice tinged with nervousness. Another witness, a weary commuter who had been waiting for the 42nd Street shuttle, mentioned hearing a muffled conversation between two individuals in hushed tones. Though details were scant, the conversation had revolved around secrecy and making sure nothing gets out. Both accounts painted a picture of clandestine meetings and covert arrangements, suggesting that Carmichael's investigation had touched a nerve. Over the next several days, Detective Bennett and her team combed through Carmichael's belongings and digital files. His battered laptop, recovered from the scene, revealed a trove of encrypted documents and unfinished emails. Among these files were drafts of his forthcoming exposé, which implicated several high-ranking officials in the Metropolitan Transportation Authority (MTA), and hinted at a conspiracy that involved fraudulent contracts with private construction firms. One document, partially recovered from corrupted data, mentioned a mysterious figure identified only by the initials J.K., a name that would prove crucial in the unfolding investigation. As forensic experts processed the evidence from the terminal, they uncovered additional clues: a partial fingerprint on the note, traces of a rare cologne on Carmichael's jacket, and a set of security camera images that, though grainy, showed a suspicious man in a tailored suit departing the scene just minutes before the body was found. Detective Bennett's instincts told her that this man was likely connected to the intricate web Carmichael had been investigating. A man who had orchestrated meetings, manipulated contracts, and ultimately silenced a journalist who dared to expose the truth. Carmichael's contacts in the journalistic community came forward with further insights. His longtime editor, Marianne Lopez of the New York Sentinel, recalled that Stephen had been increasingly paranoid in the weeks before his death. He kept saying that powerful people were watching his every move, Lopez confided. He even started using encrypted messaging apps to communicate, fearful that his phone might be tapped. A fellow reporter mentioned that Carmichael had received several threatening letters, each more ominous than the last, warning him to back off his investigation or face dire consequences. One letter had read, "Some secrets are worth killing for." The tone was unmistakably menacing, and it underscored the real danger that Carmichael had been in. Detective Bennett's investigation soon led her to the offices of the Metropolitan Transportation Authority. In a sterile conference room overlooking the bustling corridors of the MTA headquarters in Midtown Manhattan, she met with several officials to question them about the irregularities Carmichael had been investigating. The atmosphere was tense. One executive, visibly shaken, denied any wrongdoing, insisting that all contracts had been awarded through standard bidding procedures. Yet Bennett's persistent questioning revealed inconsistencies in his statements. Detailed scrutiny of financial records provided by the MTA's internal audit team revealed anomalies, large sums of money that did not correlate with the official budgets. In several cases, funds appeared to have been funneled through shell companies in the Caribbean and Eastern Europe. The numbers were staggering, and they pointed to a deliberate scheme to siphon off millions from public coffers. One name kept recurring in the tangled web of financial documents: Jonathan Keller. Keller, an influential contractor with extensive ties to the private sector, had been a favored partner of the MTA for years. Although Keller's public persona was that of a respectable businessman, whispered rumors in the construction industry hinted at his involvement in bribery and illicit deals. Detective Bennett obtained warrants to search Keller's corporate offices and private residences. In a raid conducted with the cooperation of federal agents, investigators seized stacks of ledgers, encrypted hard drives, and documents linking Keller to offshore accounts. Among the papers was a contract signed by Keller that mentioned a silence fee, a clause that suggested that those who threatened to expose the illicit scheme could be bought off or, worse, eliminated. The phrase sent chills down Bennett's spine, as it resonated with the stark reality of Carmichael's murder. As the investigation deepened, another thread emerged. An informant who identified himself only as Raven reached out to Detective Bennett via a secure phone line. Raven claimed to be a former employee of a private security firm that had been contracted by Keller to oversee certain aspects of the MTA projects. In a series of hushed anonymous calls, Raven provided details about clandestine meetings between Keller and high-level MTA officials. According to Raven, these meetings had taken place in exclusive restaurants and private clubs in Manhattan, places such as the Plaza Hotel's famed Oak Room and the Ritz-Carlton's private dining suites. Raven's information suggested that Keller and his cohorts had established a network that extended deep into the corridors of power, ensuring that any potential whistleblowers would be silenced before their stories could see the light of day. Detective Bennett arranged a discreet meeting with one such individual, a former security operative named Michael Turner, who had worked for Keller's firm several years prior. In a small nondescript diner in the financial district, Turner recounted in a low, tremulous voice how he had witnessed meetings where deals were struck with a casual brutality. They talked about numbers and contracts as if they were trivial, he said, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone to be listening. But I knew that behind those words lay a machinery of corruption that was capable of crushing anyone who got in their way. Turner provided the name J.K. once again, stating that it was the alias used by a shadowy figure who coordinated the secretive operations. Although Turner could offer little more than fragments of memory, his testimony added urgency to Bennett's search for the elusive J.K. Weeks turned into months as Detective Bennett's investigation slowly unraveled the extensive conspiracy. High-ranking MTA officials, Keller's business partners, and private security operatives were all implicated in a labyrinthine scheme of fraud, bribery, and extortion. The evidence mounted steadily, a tapestry woven from digital forensics, financial records, encrypted emails, and damning witness testimonies. Yet, as the case advanced, new layers of deception emerged. Anonymous threats continued to arrive at Bennett's office, a series of emails with subject lines like "Don't dig too deep" and "Your next step may be your last." The pressure on the investigators intensified as those implicated in the scheme used their considerable influence to stall legal proceedings and intimidate potential witnesses. In one dramatic turn of events, federal agents executed a coordinated raid on Keller's private yacht, docked at the New York harbor. The yacht, a lavish vessel that had hosted exclusive parties for the city's elite, was found to contain a cache of documents linking Keller to offshore bank accounts and international money laundering. Among the seized items was a leather-bound journal with entries in meticulous handwriting that detailed secret payments and under-the-table deals. The entries, which spanned several years, provided a direct connection between Keller's operations and the mysterious silence fee that had been mentioned in the contract. It was becoming increasingly clear that Keller was at the center of a criminal network that had not only defrauded the public but also resorted to violence to keep its activities hidden. As the case prepared to go to trial, the media caught wind of the scandal. Headlines in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal splashed the story across their front pages, and televised news networks ran hour-long segments dissecting the corruption at the heart of New York's public transportation system. The public was outraged, and protests erupted outside the MTA headquarters in Midtown. Yet, despite the outcry, many of the key players in the conspiracy remained at large, shielded by layers of legal protection and the sheer complexity of their financial dealings. On the day of the trial, the courtroom in Lower Manhattan was packed with reporters, lawyers, and citizens hungry for justice. Detective Bennett took the stand and methodically presented the evidence gathered over months of relentless investigation. She described the discovery of Stephen Carmichael's body, the significance of the note he clutched, the encrypted emails that pointed to a vast financial scheme, and the damning records linking Jonathan Keller to offshore accounts and silence fees. Her testimony was both precise and impassioned, drawing on the detailed forensic reports, financial audits, and testimonies from witnesses like Michael Turner and the anonymous informant known as Raven. One of the most compelling moments of the trial came when a forensic accountant took the stand to detail the anomalies in the financial records. He explained how millions of dollars had been funneled through a series of shell companies registered in tax havens such as the Cayman Islands and Panama. The accountant showed the jury how these transactions were carefully orchestrated to obscure their true origin, and how, ultimately, they had been used to pay off key figures to keep their illicit operations hidden. The term silence fee was dissected in painstaking detail, revealing a pattern that suggested not only bribery but also the premeditated elimination of anyone who threatened to expose the truth. Yet, even as the prosecution's case grew stronger, the defense mounted a vigorous counter-argument. Keller's legal team argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that the transactions in question could be explained as routine business practices in a globalized economy. They portrayed Keller as a savvy businessman caught in a web of bureaucracy and miscommunication, rather than a cold-blooded criminal mastermind. However, the testimony of former employees, such as Michael Turner, and the damning financial records left little room for doubt. When pressed about the anonymous threats and the encrypted emails, Keller's defense began to crumble under the weight of the evidence. In a dramatic moment during cross-examination, Detective Bennett was asked if she believed that Stephen Carmichael's murder was directly linked to his investigation into the MTA's financial irregularities. Without hesitation, she replied, "I believe that anyone who dares to challenge a system built on corruption and greed is putting their life on the line." The courtroom fell silent at the force of her conviction. Her words resonated deeply with the jurors and the assembled public, who had grown weary of the perennial corruption that had long plagued New York's institutions. Despite the overwhelming evidence, there remained one elusive element: the identity of the mysterious figure known only as J.K. Several witnesses had mentioned that J.K. was present at key meetings, and that he had orchestrated the secretive operations with chilling efficiency. Detective Bennett had uncovered fragmented digital traces of his communications, but every attempt to pinpoint his identity had been met with dead ends. As the trial neared its conclusion, the prosecution conceded that while J.K. was undoubtedly a central player in the conspiracy, his identity might never be fully revealed. This acknowledgement only deepened the mystery and left a lingering sense of unfinished business. After weeks of testimony, deliberation, and intense media scrutiny, the jury delivered a verdict that sent ripples through New York City. Several high-ranking officials and business executives were found guilty of corruption and conspiracy, and Jonathan Keller was sentenced to a lengthy prison term. The courtroom erupted in a mix of relief and dismay, as many wondered whether justice had truly been served or if the deeper roots of corruption would continue to fester beneath the surface. In the aftermath of the trial, as New York City struggled to reconcile the revelations of systemic corruption, Detective Laura Bennett continued her work with a mixture of determination and quiet melancholy. Though many of the conspirators were now behind bars and sweeping reforms had been proposed to overhaul the MTA's operations, the shadow of the case lingered in every corner of the city. The unresolved identity of J.K., the persistent anonymous threats, and the unyielding complexity of the financial network served as a constant reminder that some mysteries defied simple resolution. Unlike many true crime cases that end with a neat closure, the story of Stephen Carmichael's murder and the ensuing corruption scandal in New York left a legacy of questions. The case was a mirror reflecting the dark interplay between power, money, and secrecy, a reminder that even in a city as vibrant and transparent as New York, some truths remain hidden in the labyrinth of bureaucracy and ambition. Detective Bennett often recalled the words found clutched in Carmichael's hand, "They won't let it go," as she continued to pursue leads on unsolved cases, driven by the belief that every secret, no matter how deeply buried, eventually finds its way into the light. As the city moved on from that turbulent period, the impact of the scandal was felt in unexpected ways. Reforms were implemented not just within the MTA, but also in broader government oversight of public funds. Public trust, once eroded by revelations of corruption, began a slow and arduous process of rebuilding. Journalists, inspired by Carmichael's sacrifice, launched new investigations into financial mismanagement and corporate malfeasance. The legacy of the case became a catalyst for change, a constant reminder to both citizens and officials that transparency and accountability were not merely ideals, but necessities for a functioning democracy. For Detective Laura Bennett, the case remained a personal crucible. Late at night, when the city's lights dimmed and the cacophony of urban life faded into a soft murmur, she would revisit the evidence in her mind. The grainy surveillance footage, the damning financial records, and the whispered names of those who had tried to silence a voice of truth. The memory of Stephen Carmichael's determined gaze, captured in the final moments before his life was taken, haunted her in quiet moments of reflection. She knew that while many of the conspirators had been brought to justice, the deeper network of corruption was far from eradicated. It lurked in the corners of boardrooms and back alleys, a reminder that the fight against systemic injustice was a never-ending endeavor. In time, as New York City continued its relentless pace, the scars of that fateful night in Grand Central Terminal would gradually fade from the public consciousness. Yet for those who had lived through the ordeal, the detectives, the journalists, the everyday citizens whose lives had been touched by the scandal, the memory of the case remained indelibly etched in their hearts. It was a story without a tidy ending, a narrative that defied closure and instead served as a perpetual call to vigilance. The unanswered question of J.K. lingered like an unsolved riddle, a symbol of the inherent elusiveness of truth in a complex world. Detective Laura Bennett, now regarded as one of the stalwarts of New York's law enforcement community, continued to pursue the undercurrents of corruption that threatened to destabilize the city. Each new case she took on was approached with the hard-earned wisdom of her experience, the understanding that beneath every polished surface, there might be a hidden labyrinth of secrets waiting to be uncovered. And while the case of Stephen Carmichael had brought to light a network of deceit that spanned the highest echelons of power, it also reaffirmed her belief in the importance of relentless inquiry, of never accepting the official narrative without scrutiny. In a city defined by its vibrant energy and constant reinvention, the legacy of that November night became part of the mosaic of New York's storied history. It was a reminder that even in a place celebrated for its resilience and diversity, there were moments when the veneer of civilization cracked, revealing the raw and unsettling realities beneath. For Detective Bennett, every day was a reminder that the pursuit of justice was not measured solely by the number of convictions or the reforms that followed, but by the unwavering commitment to uncovering the truth, even when that truth was messy, incomplete, and fraught with ambiguity. As the seasons turned and New York City faced new challenges, the echoes of that dark night in Grand Central served as both a cautionary tale and a beacon of hope. It was a story that would be recounted in police training sessions, in investigative journalism workshops, and in quiet conversations among those who had witnessed the far-reaching consequences of unchecked power. And while many of the names involved in the conspiracy would eventually fade into obscurity, the impact of Stephen Carmichael's sacrifice and the determined efforts of those who pursued his story would endure as a testament to the unyielding spirit of truth. There were no easy resolutions in the world Detective Bennett inhabited. Instead, she found solace in the knowledge that every time a corrupt scheme was dismantled or a hidden truth brought to light, the city took one small step toward justice. Her resolve was both a shield and a guiding light, ensuring that even in the labyrinthine corridors of power, there would always be those who refused to let darkness prevail. And though the identity of J.K. remained shrouded in mystery, a specter lurking in the background of a much larger narrative, Detective Bennett knew that the journey toward full accountability was a marathon, not a sprint. In the end, the case of Stephen Carmichael and the sprawling corruption network it exposed did not offer a neat final conclusion. Instead, it left behind a legacy of questions, challenges, and an ongoing commitment to transparency that would shape the future of New York City. For the citizens of this great metropolis, the scandal served as a reminder that no institution, no matter how venerable or celebrated, was immune to the corrosive forces of greed and deception. And for those in law enforcement, the case was a perpetual call to arms, a reminder that the pursuit of justice was an endless quest, a responsibility carried on by every honest soul dedicated to ensuring that the truth, however elusive, would one day prevail. As Detective Laura Bennett stepped out into the brisk New York morning, the city's skyline rising boldly against the pale dawn, she carried with her not a sense of finality, but a sober recognition of the work that lay ahead. The echoes of that tragic night at Grand Central would forever be woven into the fabric of the city, a mosaic of hope, determination, and the unyielding belief that even in a world of shifting shadows, the light of truth would continue to guide the way. On a brisk November evening in Chicago, the neon glow of downtown streets mingled with the crisp autumn air, and the city hummed with its perennial energy. In the heart of the South Loop, where community and commerce intermingled, a charity gala was underway at the historic Palmer House Hilton, a venue steeped in decades of Chicago history. The event, organized by Hope for Tomorrow, a well-respected local charity dedicated to empowering underprivileged youth, was meant to be a celebration of community spirit and hope. But that night, amid laughter and clinking glasses, a dark secret was about to shatter the veneer of goodwill. Thomas Reynolds, the charity's volunteer director and a man known for his unwavering commitment to social justice, had spent months painstakingly working to expand the charity's programs. With his warm smile and steady resolve, he had become the heartbeat of Hope for Tomorrow, a true pillar in a city where change was both constant and elusive. That evening, as the gala reached its peak and guests mingled in the opulent ballroom, a scream erupted from one of the adjoining meeting rooms. Within minutes, security rushed to the scene and found Thomas lying face down on the polished hardwood floor, his eyes wide in silent terror. A crumpled program flyer, stained with blood, was clutched in his grasp. Its faded print bore a single chilling phrase: "Truth corrodes in silence." Detective Sarah Collins of the Chicago Police Department arrived at the scene within minutes. A seasoned investigator with 20 years of service, Collins was no stranger to the grim realities hidden behind the city's glitzy facade. With her dark eyes scanning every detail, she noted the eerie stillness of the room. There were no signs of a struggle, no overturned chairs or scattered documents, only the unmistakable evidence of a calculated act. The meticulously arranged chairs and the dim ambient lighting contrasted sharply with the stark brutality of Thomas's demise. In the following hours, the investigation took shape. Witnesses at the gala described the scene with varying degrees of shock and disbelief. A longtime employee of Hope for Tomorrow, Marjorie Patel, tearfully recounted how Thomas had been in high spirits earlier that evening, confidently discussing new initiatives to secure funding for youth programs. "He was so excited," Marjorie said, shaking her head as she tried to hold back tears. "He believed that if we could just expose the truth about the city's mismanagement, everything would change for the better." Her words hinted at a secret Thomas had carried with him, a truth that might have upset powerful interests. Detective Collins began her inquiries by retracing Thomas's final hours. Reviewing surveillance footage from the corridor outside the meeting room revealed a fleeting shadowy figure dressed in a dark coat. Although the images were grainy, the figure moved with a deliberate, almost predatory precision, an indication that this was no mere passerby. Collins also discovered that a set of fingerprints, carefully lifted from the flyer in Thomas's hand, did not match any of the gala's staff or known guests. A forensic analysis would later confirm that these prints belonged to an individual with a history of white-collar crimes and associations with organized crime, a man who had once worked as a security consultant for several nonprofits. Digging deeper into Thomas Reynolds' background, Detective Collins learned that his passion for charity work had been matched by an equally fervent determination to uncover corruption. Over the past year, Thomas had become increasingly concerned about discrepancies in the financial records of Hope for Tomorrow. Although the charity had long been admired for its transparency, Thomas's careful audits had revealed irregularities in several large donations and grant distributions. He had confided in close colleagues that he suspected a group of high-ranking board members were siphoning funds to line their own pockets, a betrayal that went against everything the charity stood for. His planned exposé, which he had hinted at in his personal journal, promised to reveal the corruption festering at the highest levels of the organization. In one entry dated just a week before the gala, he had written, "When greed hides behind a mask of benevolence, even the purest intentions become doomed." Tonight the truth must be set free, no matter the cost. With this new information, Collins shifted her focus to the charity's board of directors. Among the influential figures was Richard Adams, a wealthy real estate developer, known for his philanthropic endeavors, and a longtime supporter of Hope for Tomorrow. Publicly, Adams had been a generous benefactor, but whispers in business circles suggested he was also a shrewd operator with a penchant for bending rules. During interviews, several former employees mentioned that Adams had aggressively pushed for increased donations from large corporations, a move that, according to some, had resulted in inflated fundraising reports. Another board member, Evelyn Morales, a well-known community leader, recalled that Thomas had confronted her about unexplained expenditures in the charity's annual reports. "He was passionate about our mission," Morales said, voice quavering. "But he became fixated on numbers, on tracing every dollar. I tried to reassure him, but I feared he was uncovering something we'd kept hidden for too long." As the investigation unfolded, forensic accountants meticulously combed through Hope for Tomorrow's financial records. Their analysis revealed a series of large irregular transactions, money that had been transferred to a network of shell companies registered in tax havens like the Cayman Islands and Panama. One particularly damning set of records indicated that nearly 20% of the charity's annual revenue, ostensibly earmarked for youth programs, had vanished into these opaque channels. The documents were signed off by none other than Richard Adams, raising troubling questions about the nature of his involvement. Collins obtained warrants to search Adams's private offices, where investigators uncovered further evidence linking him to these suspicious transfers. A series of emails between Adams and a financial intermediary, identified only by the initials DS, discussed ensuring discretion and covering tracks in language that was as cold as it was calculated. Meanwhile, Detective Collins also re-interviewed gala guests and staff, piecing together a timeline of events. A particularly damning witness was a young volunteer named Jason Miller, who recalled seeing Thomas in a heated conversation with a man in a dark suit near the charity's administrative offices, shortly before the body was discovered. Jason described the man as tall, with a steely gaze and a slight limp. Though his recollection was vague, Collins believed it was significant. Cross-referencing this description with criminal records led her to an individual named Andrew Foster, a man with a checkered past in financial fraud and minor assault, who had once been employed by a local security firm known for its discreet handling of high-stakes corporate matters. Foster's fingerprints, once again, were found on several pieces of evidence from the crime scene. When brought in for questioning, Foster was evasive, offering only a series of half-truths about his presence at the gala. Under pressure, he eventually admitted that he had been hired, though he claimed it was for a routine security consultation by an anonymous client with connections to the charity's board. As days turned into weeks, the investigation began to resemble a labyrinth of competing narratives and hidden agendas. On one hand, Thomas Reynolds had been on the verge of exposing a significant financial scandal that implicated some of Chicago's most influential citizens. On the other hand, his murder appeared to be a deliberate attempt to silence him before his revelations could see the light of day. Detective Collins found herself navigating a minefield of conflicting testimonies and circumstantial evidence. The forensic data, the financial records, and the witness statements painted a picture of corruption, but the precise orchestration of the crime remained elusive. In a breakthrough interview with a former accountant who had once worked for Hope for Tomorrow, Detective Collins uncovered a vital clue. The accountant, Robert Jennings, recalled that in the months leading up to the gala, Thomas had expressed concern about a specific series of transfers involving one of the shell companies. Jennings revealed that the transfers were consistently approved by an individual with the initials RA, a detail that had not previously been mentioned by anyone else. This revelation cast a new light on Richard Adams's involvement, as his initials matched. Jennings further explained that Thomas had suspected Adams of redirecting funds to cover up not only internal mismanagement, but also illegal dealings with outside entities. Armed with this evidence, Collins arranged a confrontation with Richard Adams. In his sleek downtown office overlooking the Chicago River, Adams projected an aura of calm authority as he fielded questions about the charity's finances. When pressed about the irregular transfers, his initial denials grew increasingly guarded. Faced with hard evidence, Adams finally conceded that he had played a role in restructuring the charity's finances, a move he characterized as reallocating resources for growth. But his tone betrayed no remorse, and his carefully chosen words only deepened Collins's suspicions. In a private conversation recorded by investigators, Adams mentioned a silence fee to be paid to ensure that any leaks would be suppressed. The phrase resonated with the note clutched in Thomas's hand, and it became a linchpin in the emerging narrative. Despite mounting evidence against him, Adams was a man of considerable influence, and his legal team skillfully wove a defense that portrayed the financial irregularities as nothing more than aggressive business practices. Meanwhile, the investigation began to uncover connections between Adams and a network of lobbyists who had close ties to city officials. Several emails obtained through a subpoena revealed that these lobbyists had been instrumental in securing lucrative city contracts for private construction firms, contracts that had been awarded in exchange for substantial consulting fees. The scandal extended beyond the charity itself, implicating elements of city government and even a local state senator known for his staunch support of economic development projects in Chicago. In a parallel line of inquiry, Detective Collins revisited the testimony of Andrew Foster. Under intense interrogation, Foster's story unraveled. He reluctantly admitted that his presence at the gala had not been entirely incidental. Hired through back channels by a security firm with ties to the lobbyists, Foster had been assigned to monitor Thomas Reynolds. When questioned further, he revealed that he had witnessed a discreet exchange between Thomas and an unknown man in a dark suit just before Thomas left for a scheduled meeting with a board member. The description of that unknown man matched that of a figure seen in a grainy surveillance video from the charity's administrative wing, an image that remained indeterminate, his identity obscured by shadow and haste. As the various threads converged, Detective Collins began to see the outlines of a vast, multi-layered conspiracy. Thomas Reynolds' death was not an isolated incident, but rather the tragic endpoint of a relentless campaign to silence a whistleblower who threatened to expose a lucrative scheme. The embezzlement of charity funds, the use of shell companies to hide illicit transfers, the bribery of city officials, and the calculated silence fees, all pointed to a criminal network that spanned from the boardrooms of wealthy donors to the corridors of power in city government. Each new piece of evidence only served to deepen the mystery, and with it the realization that the forces at play were not easily brought to justice. Detective Collins's investigation culminated in a dramatic series of raids coordinated with federal authorities. In a high-stakes operation conducted on a rainy morning in mid-December, law enforcement agents stormed several offices associated with Hope for Tomorrow and the implicated lobbyist firms. In one nondescript building in downtown Chicago, agents uncovered a cache of financial records, encrypted hard drives, and stacks of correspondence that detailed the inner workings of the embezzlement scheme. Among the seized documents was a ledger meticulously maintained over several years, documenting millions of dollars siphoned from the charity and funneled into accounts controlled by a network of shell companies. The ledger contained entries signed with the initials RA, the same initials that had haunted Thomas's final investigations. The raids led to the arrest of several mid-level executives, including a key financial officer from the charity and a lobbyist who had acted as an intermediary between Richard Adams and the shell companies. However, despite the arrests and the weight of the evidence, many of the higher echelons of the network remained out of reach. Richard Adams himself evaded immediate arrest, his vast resources affording him a legal shield as he fought the charges in court. Meanwhile, the identity of the elusive figure known only as J.K., the man seen in surveillance footage and whispered about by former employees, remained an unsolved enigma, a ghost in the machine of corruption. In the courtroom, as prosecutors laid out the intricate web of deceit, the atmosphere was charged with a mixture of outrage and disbelief. Witness after witness recounted the insidious nature of the scheme, a scheme that had exploited the generosity of donors and the trust of the community for the profit of a select few. The evidence, ranging from forensic analyses and financial audits to recorded conversations and digital trails, painted a damning portrait of systemic corruption. Yet, even as the verdicts were rendered and sentences imposed on several of the conspirators, the case left behind an unsettling residue. For many in the courtroom, the idea that powerful figures had managed to conceal the full extent of their crimes was a bitter pill to swallow. Detective Sarah Collins, though lauded for her relentless pursuit of the truth, found little solace in the legal victories. The trial had secured convictions for several mid-level players, but the high-ranking officials and the architects of the conspiracy had managed to avoid full accountability. In the days following the trial, Collins spent long hours reviewing the case files in her modest office at the Chicago Police Department. The ledger with the RA initials, the cryptic note from Thomas Reynolds, and the remnants of digital communications all served as reminders that the investigation had unearthed only a fragment of a much larger corruption network. There were still unanswered questions about the role of Richard Adams, the true identity of J.K., and the broader implications of the silence fees that had been paid to secure hush money. Instead of a neat conclusion, the case left the city and Detective Collins with a lingering uncertainty. In one final twist, as Collins was closing her office late one night, she found an envelope addressed to her in bold, unyielding letters. For every truth revealed, another is waiting in the shadows. Inside, a single sheet of paper bore the message, "In the labyrinth of power, some corridors remain forever dark." There was no signature, no explanation, only the ominous suggestion that the corruption she had fought so hard to expose might still be alive, lurking in parts of the system beyond the reach of justice. In the weeks that followed, the public outcry led to sweeping reforms within Hope for Tomorrow and more rigorous oversight of charitable organizations in Chicago. New legislation was introduced to increase transparency and accountability in the use of public funds and private donations. Yet, despite these measures, many in the community felt that the real work was only beginning. The legacy of Thomas Reynolds' murder and the cascade of revelations that followed served as a persistent reminder that even the most noble causes could be undermined by greed and secrecy. Detective Collins continued her career with a renewed sense of purpose, yet she carried the weight of the unresolved elements of the case like a constant companion. Every day, as she patrolled the busy streets of Chicago or reviewed new cases, she recalled the determined face of Thomas Reynolds, the cryptic words in his final moments, and the intricate ledger that had hinted at a hidden world of financial deceit. She knew that the fight against corruption was not a battle with a clear endpoint. It was an ongoing struggle against forces that adapted and evolved with time. In the end, the case of Thomas Reynolds and the corruption within Hope for Tomorrow did not end with a tidy closure. Instead, it remained a complex tapestry of triumphs and setbacks, a story of brave individuals who risked everything to expose the truth, and of powerful figures who managed to keep some of their darkest secrets hidden. Detective Collins often mused that the real tragedy lay not in the murder itself, but in the enduring corruption that had touched every level of society, from the humble charity worker to the influential board members who governed the fate of millions. As Chicago moved forward, slowly healing from the shock of the revelations, the case became a touchstone for reformers, journalists, and citizens determined to ensure that public institutions remained transparent. New oversight committees were established, and the incident sparked a broader national conversation about accountability in both non-profit organizations and government agencies. Yet for those who had been directly affected by the scandal, the families of the victims, the whistleblowers who had risked their livelihoods, and the detectives who had dedicated years to the case, the truth was a living, breathing enigma, one that could never be entirely captured by a verdict or sealed away in an archive. Detective Sarah Collins, standing on a busy Chicago street corner on a crisp winter morning, looked out at the throngs of people hurrying along the sidewalks. The city, with all its resilience and complexity, carried on in defiant continuity, even as its darker chapters lingered in whispered memory. For Collins, the pursuit of justice was not marked by a single moment of finality, but by an ongoing commitment to question, to investigate, and to never settle for partial answers. In her heart, she understood that while some corridors of power might be illuminated by the harsh light of truth, many would remain shrouded in shadow, a reminder that in the labyrinth of corruption, every revelation was only a beginning. And so, as Chicago's skyline rose boldly against the winter sky, and life continued with all its ceaseless energy, Detective Collins resolved to keep moving forward. There would always be new cases to solve, new secrets to uncover, and new battles to fight. The legacy of Thomas Reynolds and the tangled web of deceit he had uncovered would remain a part of her story, a constant, if bittersweet reminder that while justice might sometimes be incomplete, the quest for truth was an endless necessary journey.